Some things on the internet are not meant to be found. They lurk in the shadows, waiting.
Marcus Webb was 38 years old, 14 years into a career that had chewed him up and was nearly finished spitting him out. City journalism. Chicago, specifically, the kind of beat that starts with ambition and ends with a drinking habit and a resting heart rate your doctor describes as concerning. He'd covered homicides, corruption, a city councilman who turned out to be three separate kinds of criminal. He was good at his job. He was also exhausted in the specific way that stops feeling like tiredness and starts feeling like something structural, like a load-bearing wall that's been quietly cracking for years. Harlow Creek was his idea, his reset. Population 1,102, tucked into the northeastern corner of Iowa, like something the rest of the world had simply forgotten to disturb. He'd found a rental listing online, a two-bedroom Craftsman with a wraparound porch, $200 cheaper per month than his Chicago studio, and made the decision in about 20 minutes. The drive-in felt like exhaling. Gravel driveways, porch lights coming on at dusk in warm amber clusters, a grain elevator in the distance catching the last of the October sun. The air through his cracked window smelled like pine resin and cold soil and something baking, actual baking, from an actual house, the way air isn't supposed to smell in any city he'd ever lived in. His landlady, Ruth, met him at the door with a plate of apple bread and a handshake that felt like a promise. The sheriff, big man, silver mustache, gave him a two-finger wave from his truck as he drove past. A kid across the street stopped raking leaves long enough to shout, "Welcome," like he meant it. Three different neighbors, unprompted, said the same thing to him in his first 2 days. "You're going to love it here. Now we hope you like it. Not let us know if you need anything." The same phrase, word for word, delivered with the same warm, steady smile. Marcus noticed. He filed it away under small-town charm and made himself a drink on his perfect porch and watched the stars come out over a town that looked, in every possible way, like exactly what he'd been looking for. His first night was the best sleep he'd had in 4 years. Day 3, he found the map that IT had been slipped under his front door sometime before he woke up. No envelope, no note, just a single sheet of white paper, folded in thirds, with a hand-drawn map on the inside. Pencil lines, careful and deliberate. He recognized the layout almost immediately. Main Street, the grain elevator, the church on Poplar, the creek running along the eastern edge of town. Whoever had drawn it knew Harlow Creek well. Every street was labeled, every landmark placed with quiet precision, except for one location at the far southeastern edge of the map, past where the roads ended and the cornfields began. A small circle, drawn and redrawn until the pencil had nearly worn through the paper. No label, just the circle and a single line extending from it, like a path or a direction or a warning pointing somewhere it didn't want to name. He brought it up with Ruth that morning over coffee, keeping his voice easy, curious. Held it up and asked if she knew what it was. She looked at it for exactly 1 second too long. "No idea," she said, and smiled. "Probably kids. You know how kids are." The smile was warm. Her eyes were somewhere else entirely. He let it go. The neighbor anomalies were easier to dismiss individually, harder to ignore in accumulation. Dale from next door had spent 20 minutes Monday showing Marcus the best fishing spots along the creek, practically glowing with small-town hospitality. Wednesday morning, Marcus waved from his porch, and Dale looked straight through him, turned, and went back inside without a word. Mrs. Hensley, who had brought over a casserole on day 2, crossed to the other side of the street when she saw him coming out of the post office Thursday. He was trying to convince himself he'd imagined it when the kid appeared. 14, maybe 15, on a beat-up mountain bike with a broken reflector rattling against the spokes. He slowed to a stop at the end of Marcus's driveway and just sat there, like he was deciding something. Marcus looked up from the porch steps. "Help you with something? You're the new guy?" Not a question. "Marcus." "Yeah." The kid chewed the inside of his cheek. Looked down the street in both directions. Quick, practiced. "I'm Danny." "Hey, Danny." A long pause. A bird called somewhere in the pines and went quiet. "The potluck," Danny said finally. "On Friday. You heard about it. Ruth mentioned it. Said the whole town turns out." "Yeah." Another pause. Something moved behind his eyes, something that wanted out and kept getting pulled back. "You don't have to go, though. It's not. They make it sound like you have to, but you don't. You could just like..." He exhaled through his nose. "You could say you're not feeling well." Marcus studied him. "Is there a reason I shouldn't go?" Danny's jaw worked. He looked down at his handlebars, then back up, and for just a moment Marcus thought he was actually going to say it, whatever it was. "Just..." He pushed off with one foot. "You don't have to go. That's all." He was halfway down the block before Marcus could say anything else. And then he was gone, the broken reflector still rattling, getting quieter, until the street was just a street again. Marcus stood there for a minute with the folded map in his back pocket and the particular feeling of a person who has been warned about something without being told what. He went to the potluck. Obviously, he went to the potluck. The Harlow Creek Autumn Potluck was held in the park off Main Street, and it was, without exaggeration, the most picture-perfect community gathering Marcus had ever seen. String lights. He told himself later he didn't know why he opened them. That was a lie. He opened them because Danny's face had told him to. Because Ruth's smile had told him to. Because 60 people standing in synchronized silence had told him that whatever was down here was the thing he wasn't supposed to find. The smell was dust and old paper and something faintly chemical, like developer fluid. Like a darkroom. He used his phone flashlight. The walls were covered in photographs. Dozens of them. Maybe more. All the same format. A person, mid-30s to mid-40s, photographed from a slight distance in what was clearly Harlow Creek. The post office, the park, the gravel driveways. Candid shots. Arrival shots. Each one labeled at the bottom in small, typed text. A name, a date of arrival, and a date listed as departure. Going back decades, the oldest photographs had gone sepia at the edges. Not one departure date was more than 6 months after arrival. He moved the light slowly across the faces, strangers, all of them. People who had come here looking for whatever people look for in small towns. And then the light caught a face he recognized. Older than Marcus had known him. College-aged. But the jaw was the same, and the ears, and the expression that sat behind the eyes. Danny's brother. Departed, March 2019. Danny had told him his brother moved to Des Moines. Got a job there. Called on holidays. Marcus stood in that cellar for what felt like a very long time. Then he heard footsteps on the path outside, and he turned off his light, and he stood very still in the dark among all those photographs of all those people who had come to Harlow Creek looking for a fresh start, and he waited to find out if he'd just made the last mistake of his life. He waited 4 full minutes by his phone clock before he moved. Then he climbed out of that cellar, set the doors back down as quietly as he could, and walked. Not ran, walked, because running felt like the wrong thing to do in a place that was watching, back through the corn and across the dark edge of the park, where the potluck was still going, fiddles still playing, laughter still landing on its careful beat. He didn't go back to the tables. He went to his car. His hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised him later. He'd expected them to shake. Instead, there was just a cold, editorial clarity. The same feeling he used to get when a source said something that made an entire story restructure itself in real time. The feeling of a puzzle that has just shown you what it actually is. He pulled out of the parking spot slowly. No urgency. Nothing to see. The drive back to the Craftsman took 4 minutes. He didn't go inside. He didn't need anything badly enough to go back inside that house. Whatever was in there, whatever Ruth had touched, whatever that warm, careful woman had arranged on his behalf, he didn't want any of it. He had his wallet. He had his phone. He had a full tank of gas because he'd filled up that morning in a gas station where a man had smiled at him and said, "You're going to love it here," and Marcus had thought, "Yes, maybe I will." He pulled into the driveway to turn around. Ruth was standing at the front door. She wasn't backlit, wasn't dramatic about it, just standing there in the porch light with her hands folded in front of her, still in her potluck clothes, watching him, smiling the smile that he now understood had never once belonged to him. He put the window down. He doesn't know why. Some reflex toward normalcy, toward the fiction that this was still a conversation two people could have. She spoke first. "We saw you leave early," she said. Her voice was exactly as warm as it had always been. "That's okay. Most people need a night to think." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he put the window back up. He drove west out of Harlow Creek at a speed that was only slightly over the limit, because something told him that the rules still applied. Here, that the town still had expectations of him, and that the most dangerous thing he could do was give it a reason to accelerate whatever timeline he had just disrupted. He hit the county road, then the state highway, then the interstate, wide and lit and full of strangers who had no idea who he was. And he did not stop driving until the sky ahead of him started going gray with the beginning of dawn. I don't know where Marcus is now. What I know is that 8 months after he moved to Harlow Creek, a post appeared on a Midwestern community forum. Username throwaway, no post history. The title was, "Anyone have information about Harlow Creek, Iowa?" The body of the post read, "My uncle relocated there last fall. We thought he just needed space. He'd been going through a rough time. But it's been 8 months and his phone is disconnected and his emails bounce. And when I called the town's general number, the woman who answered said she'd never heard of him. His name is Marcus Webb. He's 38. If anyone knows anything, please reply." The post was 3 years ago. No one ever replied. I want to believe Marcus made it out. I want to believe he just needed, as Ruth put it, a night to think, that he drove to some other town, changed his number, started over somewhere that didn't have a storm cellar full of photographs. I want to believe that. But the Reddit post was 3 years ago, and nobody replied, and Harlow Creek, Iowa still has a population sign on the county road heading in. I've never checked whether the number on it changes. Let's talk about something a little closer to home, because the next one didn't happen to a stranger passing through. It didn't happen to someone who chose the wrong listing on a rental site, someone who could have just kept driving. The next one happened to someone who was born there, someone who thought that because a place made her, it owed her the truth. She was wrong about that too. Claire Dunmore hadn't been back to Dunmore Falls in 15 years, and the town had spent that time doing what small towns do when the young people leave and the economy doesn't. It had gotten smaller. Not just in population, in everything. In ambition, in color, in the particular energy a place has when it believes it has a future. Half the storefronts on Main Street were papered over from the inside. The hardware store her father used to take her to on Saturday mornings was a cell phone repair shop now, and the cell phone repair shop looked like it hadn't repaired anything in 2 years. The diner was still open. The church was still open. Those two things, she thought, are always still open. She'd left at 23 with a journalism degree and a one-way bus ticket and the firm intention of never constructing a single sentence that began with "back home in." She'd mostly succeeded. Built something in Portland, an actual life, an actual apartment, a career that paid, and a therapist who had helped her dismantle, brick by careful brick, the particular damage that Dunmore Falls had done to her. Most of that damage had a name. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old when the river took her, on a Tuesday in July that smelled like cut grass and river mud and everything that summer is supposed to be before it turns. The ruling was accidental drowning. Claire had been 12. She had not believed it for a single day in the 26 years since. But believing something and proving it are different countries, and Claire had eventually chosen to live in the second one, where the air was cleaner. Her mother's death had brought her back. Specifically, her mother's house, 3 bedrooms, a basement full of 40 years of accumulated life, and an estate that wasn't going to settle itself. Claire had given herself 1 week. Get in, clear it out, sign what needed signing, leave. The river, she noticed on her drive in, was still beautiful. That was the thing about Dunmore Falls that had always unsettled her in a way she couldn't fully articulate. The town was dying and gray and heavy with secrets, but the river that ran along its eastern edge was genuinely, almost offensively gorgeous. Clear water over smooth stones, cottonwoods leaning over it like they were listening to something. Beautiful the way things are beautiful when they don't need you to think so. She found the box on the 3rd day, pushed to the back of her mother's bedroom closet behind a row of winter coats that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Small, wooden, the kind with a brass latch and a small lock. Claire didn't recognize it. In 35 years of visiting that house, she had never once seen it. She found the key taped to the underside of her mother's nightstand drawer. Her mother had wanted her to find it. She understood that immediately. The placement was too deliberate, too considered, for anything else. Her mother had left her a locked box and the means to open it, and had apparently decided that death was the appropriate moment to finally say what living had not allowed her to. Claire sat on the edge of the stripped mattress and opened it. The journals were small, the kind you find in a drugstore, spiral-bound, with cardboard covers. 7 of them, spanning almost 20 years. Claire's mother had not been a writer in any expressive sense. The early entries were spare and practical, the kind of record-keeping a busy woman does when she's trying to hold a household together. Grocery lists bleeding into brief notations. Claire's recital Thursday. Lily's checkup moved to the 14th. Furnace needs the filter replaced. Normal. Ordinary. The texture of a life being lived without drama. Then Lily died, and the journals changed. Not immediately. The week of the drowning was mostly blank pages, which said everything. But 3 weeks later, the writing came back different. Smaller. Pressed harder into the paper, like her mother needed the pen to hold the weight of what she was putting down. The sentences stopped completing themselves. References appeared without context, names without explanation, a vocabulary that felt borrowed from somewhere old and specific. The arrangement holds. E says it always holds. I don't know how to live in a town that does this, and I don't know how to leave it. What we owe the river, what we have always owed it. I keep telling myself Lily didn't suffer. E says they never suffer. I don't know why I keep asking him things. The name keeps appearing in my head when I try to sleep. Harmon. 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 I need to stop writing it down. Claire read the journals in one sitting, on the floor of her mother's bedroom with her back against the wall and the box open beside her. When she finished, she sat very still for a long time. I'm going to read you one of the journal entries directly. It's from about 4 months after Lily's death, and I want you to hear it in her mother's words because my paraphrase will not do it justice. You'll understand why it kept me up. Pastor Hale asked me today how I was holding up. I told him fine. He put his hand on my arm, and said Lily is at peace and part of something larger now. I smiled and said thank you, because what else do you say to the man who helped choose her? What else do you say in a town where everyone chose her and everyone is still here and she is not? She started asking questions the next morning. She was careful about it, casual, oblique, the approach of someone who has spent years interviewing people who don't want to talk. She mentioned the journals to Pastor Hale over the coffee hour after Sunday service, watching his face the way she'd learned to watch faces. He went very still, not frightened, something older than frightened. He set his cup down with the deliberate steadiness of a man who has been preparing for a particular conversation for a very long time and is now deciding whether this is the moment to have it. Your mother, he said carefully, carried a great deal of grief. She did, Claire said. Were you aware she kept journals? The stillness deepened. I wasn't. He excused himself 2 minutes later and did not come back. The woman at the gas station was different. 50s, work-worn, someone Claire didn't recognize, probably arrived after Claire left. She filled Claire's tank without making eye contact, and when Claire went to pay, the woman pressed a folded piece of paper into her palm along with the change. Fast. Practiced. Claire waited until she was in the car to open it. Stop asking. Leave before the river rises. The name in the journals was Harmon. Earl Harmon, it turned out, 80 years old, still living on the same property his family had farmed for 4 generations, 2 miles east of town on a road that ran alongside the river. Claire found him in 20 minutes. She called ahead, which she hadn't expected to do, and he answered on the second ring. She told him she'd found her mother's journals. A long silence. I wondered, he said finally, when you'd come back. You knew I would. I knew eventually one of them would. Another pause. Come Tuesday. I'll make coffee. Earl Harmon was small in the way very old men sometimes get. Like the years had gently compressed him, taken the height, and left the density. He met her at the door with 2 mugs of coffee and the expression of a man who had rehearsed this conversation in his head for decades and was simply ready for it to be over. He didn't make her ask. He sat across from her at a kitchen table that had probably seated 4 generations of Harmons, wrapped both hands around his mug, and told her. The drought had started in 1953 and gone on for 3 years. This part of Iowa, the Dunmore Basin, the river valley, depended on that water in a way that a person who hadn't farmed it couldn't fully understand. By 1956, the farmland was dying. 3 families had already sold and left. The ones who stayed were watching everything they'd built across generations simply stop. Someone, Earl didn't say who, and Claire believed him that he genuinely didn't know, brought up the old way. The thing their grandparents had known, back when people still understood that rivers aren't neutral. That water gives and water takes, and if you wanted to keep giving, there are terms. The town voted. Not formally, not in writing. In the way small towns make decisions that can never be acknowledged. In kitchen conversations and quiet agreements, and the collective understanding that some things get done and then never get spoken of directly again. The drought broke within the month, and every generation since, when the time came, the river took one. It's always young, Earl said, without inflection. That's part of it. It doesn't. We don't choose randomly. There's a way of knowing when it's time. When the river starts running low in a dry year, there are signs. Claire looked at him across the table. Lily was 9 years old. Yes, she was 9 years old, and this town voted. Most of them didn't know the specifics. They knew there was an arrangement. Most people don't ask for the specifics. The kitchen was very quiet. A clock ticked somewhere. Outside, through the window, Claire could see the river. She said, "So I drove 14 hours for a folk ritual and a dead plant collection." Earl looked at her. He didn't laugh, and she hadn't expected him to. The joke was for herself, a small, desperate piece of scaffolding she'd built in real time, because the alternative was coming apart completely at a stranger's kitchen table, and she refused to do that. The horror settled back in almost immediately, the way it does. "Your mama knew," Earl said gently. She just couldn't say it out loud. "I think she hoped. I think she believed if she wrote it down, and if she left it for you, that would be a kind of—" "Don't," Claire said. He stopped. She drove back to her mother's house with all the windows down, needing the cold air the way you need something physical when your mind is doing something you can't keep up with. That night the river was louder than it had been. She could hear it from the bedroom, which she hadn't been able to before, a low continuous sound that the walls of the house didn't fully block. She dreamed of Lily. This wasn't unusual. She dreamed of Lily most of her adult life, and the dreams were usually sad in a quiet, bearable way. The soft grief of something that never got a finish. This dream was different. In this dream, Lily was standing waist deep in the river, and she was looking at Claire with an expression that Claire had never seen on her sister's face in life. Not sadness, not peace, something older and colder than either. She woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of rain. The river had flooded by morning. Not severely, not a disaster-level event, not the kind of thing that made the news. Just a quiet, steady overnight rise that had pushed the water maybe 30 feet past its bank, across the low field behind her mother's house, up to the edge of the backyard. Locals she called told her the same thing, one after another, with the same measured tone, first time in about 30 years. Said it like a fact. Said it like they weren't surprised. Her car wouldn't start. She turned the key 4 times, checked the battery connections, tried again. Nothing. The engine didn't even attempt to turn over, just silence. The way machines go silent when something fundamental has stopped. She stood in the driveway looking at the water line, and she thought about Earl's voice saying when the river starts running low in a dry year, there are signs. She thought about the woman at the gas station. She thought about her mother's handwriting getting smaller and smaller, pressing harder, like she was trying to push the words somewhere they couldn't be found. She packed a bag, just what she could carry. She was crossing the backyard toward the road when she saw it in the water. She has never been able to describe it precisely, and I'm going to respect that. I'm going to give you what she gave me, which was this, a shape, roughly the size of a child, beneath the surface of the floodwater, moving against the current. Not with it, against it, moving toward the house, moving toward the place where Claire was standing. The shape paused. It turned toward her, and Claire, who had spent 15 years rebuilding herself into someone practical and rational and unafraid of this town, dropped her bag and ran. She made the highway on foot in just under 40 minutes. A trucker gave her a ride to the next county. She never went back. The flooding subsided 2 days later. When it did, the water line it left on the headstone in Dunmore Falls Municipal Cemetery, Lily and Dunmore, beloved daughter, gone too soon, was exactly at the engraved letters of her name. A missing persons report was filed 4 months later, after Claire stopped returning calls. Claire Dunmore, 38, last known address Portland, Oregon, last seen Dunmore Falls, Iowa. The report is still open. I promised you 3 stories, and I promised you the third one was the one I almost didn't tell. So here it is. I'll warn you now, this one didn't happen to a stranger passing through. It didn't happen to a woman chasing her family's secrets. This one happened to me. And if you've been listening carefully, you already know that means I'm either very lucky or still not entirely sure what I survived. Let me step out of the narrator's chair for a second. Everything I've told you tonight, Marcus, Claire, The towns they walked into and barely walked out of came to me through documentation. Forums, reports, secondhand accounts, the kind of sourced material I've spent years learning to verify. I'm careful about what I put in front of you. I don't do unconfirmed. I don't do rumor dressed up as testimony. If I can't find at least 2 corroborating threads, it doesn't make the script. I've covered somewhere north of 300 cases in the time I've been doing this. Disappearances, hauntings, towns with histories that don't survive scrutiny, institutions that operate just slightly outside what the law can see. I've read things that would genuinely rearrange how you move through the world if you let them. I've read them, documented them, filed them, and slept fine. I'm telling you this so you understand what I mean when I say, this rattled me. September 2019. I was driving back from a research trip. I won't say which state, and that's deliberate. You'll understand why later. Solo, 2-lane highways. The kind of drive that's just road and sky and static between radio stations for hours at a stretch. I know that drive. I like that drive. There's a specific kind of thinking you can only do when you're alone in a car and there's nothing to look at. My GPS glitched somewhere around the 4-hour mark. Not dramatically. It didn't die, didn't reroute me wildly. It just went slightly uncertain, the little blue arrow doing that hesitation thing where it can't quite commit to. They went back. They answered 2 words. I went. And then that account was deleted. Not deactivated, deleted, the posts wiped, the username returning a not found error. Within 48 hours of that reply. I've thought about that a lot. I saved screenshots of the entire thread. I have them. I've looked at them more times than I can count, in the particular 3 a.m. way you look at things you can't stop looking at. I haven't decided if I'll post them. Part of that is because I can't verify them as anything other than what they appear to be, and I have standards about that. Part of it, and I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you've earned honesty by making it this far tonight, is that I'm not entirely sure posting them is safe. I checked the photo of the sign one more time before I went to sleep that night. The one I'd taken on the way in. Pop 614. I thought about the sign in my rearview mirror, the number I'd told myself I couldn't read. I'm still not sure whether the number changed. Whether it was always 613 and I'd misread it in the fading light on my way in. Whether something happened in that town while I was eating a grilled cheese and being watched by a child who didn't blink. Whether the figure on the road was a subtraction or a reminder. I don't know. I go back and forth on whether not knowing is better or worse than the alternative. The screenshots are in a folder on my desktop. I've titled it Kinsley. I haven't opened it in 4 months. 3 towns. 3 different kinds of wrong. I've been sitting with these stories long enough now to see the thing that connects them, and I want to share it with you before we close tonight because I think it matters. It's not the supernatural, exactly. It's not monsters, not creatures, not forces beyond human comprehension, or at least, that's not the root of it. The root of it is simpler and older and honestly more frightening than any of that. It's agreement. Marcus didn't encounter a monster in Harlow Creek. He encountered a community that had decided, collectively and completely, that new people were a resource. Claire didn't lose her sister to something that crawled out of the dark. She lost her to a room full of neighbors who looked at a child and looked at their farmland and made a calculation. And Kinsley, whatever Kinsley was, whatever it is, functioned because everyone in it was operating from the same understanding, following the same unspoken rules, performing the same careful normalcy for anyone who wandered in off a county road. Small towns aren't dangerous because they're isolated. That's what people get wrong about them. They're dangerous because everyone knows everyone. Because everyone shares the same history, the same silences, the same inherited agreements about what gets acknowledged and what gets buried, and what gets smiled over with a warm, steady expression that never quite reaches the eyes. Because sometimes everyone agrees. That's the thing that keeps me up. Not the figure on the road, not the shape in the floodwater, the voting, the deciding, the way an entire community can look at something unconscionable and simply choose. If you've lived somewhere that felt wrong, that felt like it was performing normalcy specifically for your benefit, like the friendliness was a costume the town put on when strangers arrived, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. I read everything, every single thread, and some of you have sent me